The engagement ring was burning a hole in my jacket pocket when my fiancé threw the manila folder across the table at our favorite Italian restaurant. And I watched printed screenshots scatter across the white tablecloth like grenades. "Your brother showed me everything," she said, her voice cracking, and I sat there with my hand halfway to my pocket where the ring box sat, a 2-carat diamond I'd saved 8 months to afford, while she jabbed her finger at photos showing me supposedly wrapped around some woman at a bar I'd never even been to. My brother Drew had always been the golden child, the one my mom fawned over despite his failed businesses and maxed-out credit cards. But I never imagined he'd fabricate an entire cheating scandal just to destroy me. And honestly, I should have seen it coming because that's what our whole childhood had been. When I was 7 and Drew was 10, he broke my Nintendo and told my mom I'd done it myself. And she believed him without question. Made me apologize to him while he smirked behind her back. When I was 14 and saved up my lawn mowing money to buy a guitar, he borrowed it without asking. Left it in his friend's garage where it got stolen. And my mom told me I should have been more responsible instead of being so careless. Every achievement I ever had got minimized or reframed as luck, while Drew's failures got spun as learning experiences, and my mom's eyes would just glaze over with this protective love whenever she looked at him like he could do no wrong, even when he was clearly obviously in the wrong. My fiancé was still talking, words coming faster now, angrier, and I caught fragments about how Drew had warned her months ago that I might be unfaithful, and the pieces were clicking together in my head like a puzzle I desperately didn't want to solve. A month ago, at her birthday party, Drew had shown up 3 hours late and clearly intoxicated, stumbling through my parents' backyard with a gift bag that probably cost more than my entire contribution. And I'd watched him corner my fiancé by the dessert table, watched him lean in too close. And when I'd asked her about it later, she'd brushed it off. He'd made a toast that night, raised his beer bottle high, and announced to everyone about how some guys work hard while others work smart, staring directly at me. And my mom had actually applauded. And I'd felt that familiar burn of humiliation in my chest. Now my fiancé was standing up, her chair scraping loud against the floor, and other diners were starting to stare. Drew said, "You were pathetic." But I didn't believe it until now. Then she was gone, pushing through the restaurant doors, and I was left sitting there with a ring in my pocket and a check for $63 and the crushing realization that I just lost everything. I paid the bill in a daze and drove to my parents' house because some stupid, naive part of me still thought they'd be on my side. Still believed that family meant something more than blood and obligation. The lights were on in the kitchen when I pulled up. My old beat-up Civic looking pathetic next to Drew's leased BMW, and I walked in through the side door like I'd done 1,000 times before, and that's when I heard them. She bought every single screenshot. It was almost too easy. My brother's voice carried from the kitchen, loud and celebratory, and my mom laughed. Actually laughed. This delighted sound I recognized from every time Drew had pulled off some scheme growing up. I stood frozen in the doorway and watched my mom pour champagne into 2 glasses. Cheap champagne from the bottle she kept for special occasions. And Drew was grinning like he'd won the lottery. "This is better for everyone," my mom said, reaching over to pat his hand. And I felt something inside me crack, something fundamental that I didn't know could break. Drew can provide for her properly. Give her the life she deserves, and you'll find someone more on your level eventually. The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, like she was discussing weather or grocery lists, made it somehow worse than if she'd been angry or vindictive, because this was just casual cruelty. Just the natural order of things in her mind where Drew deserved the best, and I deserved whatever was left over. I must have made some sound because they both turned. And for a second, my mom looked almost guilty. But then her face hardened into that expression I knew so well. The one that said I was being unreasonable, oversensitive, making a big deal out of nothing. Drew didn't even have the decency to look ashamed, just raised his champagne glass in a mock salute, and I realized with perfect clarity that I was never going to get an apology, never going to get acknowledgement, never going to be anything but the lesser son in this house. I turned and walked out, didn't slam the door or make a scene, just left. And that was the last time I spoke to either of them for almost 6 years. A week later, the Facebook post went live. Drew and my fiancé smiling at the camera, her hand prominently displayed with a ring on her finger, and it took me almost a full minute to recognize it as mine, the one I'd accidentally left on my parents' kitchen counter that night in my shock. What belonged to him by right is now in worthy hands. Drew's caption read, and the comments were full of congratulations, relatives I barely knew celebrating this new couple, and nobody, not a single person, seemed to question the timeline or wonder what had happened to me. I spent that entire night deleting contacts, every family member, every mutual friend, anyone who'd liked that post or commented, congratulations, just methodically cutting ties like I was pruning a diseased tree. And by sunrise, I'd sold everything I owned that wouldn't fit in my Civic, packed one suitcase with clothes in my laptop, and transferred my savings to a new bank account my family didn't know about. The last thing I did before I drove away was look back at my parents' house one final time. And I made myself a promise that I would never ever let anyone make me feel that small again, that worthless, that disposable, and that when I came back, if I came back, it would be on my terms, and they would finally understand exactly what they'd thrown away. Honestly, when I first heard the story, I was absolutely floored by how easily a mother could just write off one son to favor the other. I mean, can you even imagine? Giving your own brother's engagement ring to another woman is just a whole different level of cold. Let me know how you would have handled this, because I definitely would have lost it right then and there. 6 years is a long time to disappear long enough that people stopped looking for you. And I spent every single day of those years building something they could never take away from me. Something that existed purely because I willed it into existence through 80-hour work weeks and determination that bordered on obsession. I landed in Austin with $800 to my name, no connections, no safety net, just a suitcase and a laptop, and this burning need to prove that I was worth something, that their assessment of me had been catastrophically wrong. I worked construction during the day, the kind of back-breaking labor that left my hands blistered and bleeding, carrying lumber in the Texas heat that hit 105 degrees by noon. And then I'd come back to my efficiency apartment and code until 3 in the morning, teaching myself advanced programming through free online courses and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. My first breakthrough came 8 months in a small contract building a website for a local restaurant chain. $3,000 that felt like winning the lottery. And instead of celebrating, I went straight to a used electronics store and bought a server, a hulking black tower that took up half my kitchen counter. Lucent text started in that kitchen. Lines of code written while I ate ramen for the 4th night in a row. And slowly, painfully slowly, I built something that actually worked. A project management platform that was cleaner and faster than anything else on the market. The first year I made $40,000, barely enough to live on. But the second year I made $200,000. And the third year I broke $1 million. And I remember pulling over on the highway because my hands were shaking too badly to drive safely. Most people who make their first $1 million go out and buy a watch or a car, something visible to prove they've made it. But I'd spent 6 years becoming invisible, deliberately staying off social media, using an LLC to keep my name off public records, and I just rolled that money back into the company. Hired 3 developers who were smarter than me, rented actual office space. By year 4, Lucent Tech had 20 employees and contracts with mid-sized companies across the Southwest. And I was the CEO nobody had ever heard of. The ghost in the machine who showed up to exactly 0 networking events and conducted every meeting over video calls with my camera off. I never looked them up, never searched for my brother or my mom or my former fiancé on Facebook. Never let myself wonder if they thought about me because that way lay madness and I had work to do. But in year 5, I hired a private investigator, told myself it was just due diligence. But really, I needed to know. The report came back thick with printouts and photographs, and I read it in my office after everyone had gone home, and every page was more satisfying than the last in the most vindictive way possible. My brother had burned through our father's inheritance in 18 months. Lost it gambling on sports, betting, and cryptocurrency schemes. And now he was living in my old childhood bedroom with my former fiancé and their 2-year-old daughter in a house that was falling apart because my mom couldn't afford repairs. She was working 2 jobs, morning shift at a grocery store and evening shift doing data entry from home. 63 years old and supporting 3 adults plus a toddler because Drew couldn't hold down employment. Kept getting fired for showing up late or arguing with managers or just not showing up at all. The house I'd grown up in had 3 liens against it. The roof was visibly sagging in the photos, and my mom's car was a 15-year-old sedan held together with hope and duct tape, and Drew's leased BMW had been repossessed 14 months ago. I sat with that report for hours, and I kept waiting to feel guilty or sad. Kept expecting some surge of familial obligation, but all I felt was this cold, clear satisfaction, like watching dominoes fall in exactly the pattern you'd predicted. The absolute kicker came 6 months later when an application landed on my HR manager's desk, forwarded to me with a note, and it was Drew's resume submitted through a recruiting agency that had no idea who owned Lucent Tech. And I've never laughed harder or felt more vindicated in my entire life. He'd listed himself as senior project manager at companies I'd worked at, taking credit for projects I'd built, claiming expertise in technologies he definitely didn't understand. And his cover letter was this masterpiece of unearned confidence about how he was accustomed to success and required competitive compensation reflective of his value. I scheduled a video interview personally, kept my camera off, disguised my voice slightly, and watched him pin and posture for 45 minutes talking about achievements he'd stolen from my life. And when he mentioned that his younger brother had never really understood business, I had to mute myself to keep from responding. The rejection email went out the same day, professional and bland. And I wondered if he even connected it, if some part of his brain registered that he'd just been turned down by the little brother he destroyed. The letter from my mom arrived on a Wednesday in November, forwarded 3 times because she'd sent it to my old address. And the envelope was the cheap kind from dollar stores, my name written in her shaky handwriting. Inside was a single page about a family reunion she was planning. How it had been too long. How Drew had really matured and wanted to help me get my life on track. Had big plans he wanted to share. And she hoped I'd put aside my pride and come home because family was supposed to forgive. I read it 3 times standing in my downtown condo that cost more per month than she made in 6 and made a decision that was probably petty and definitely vindictive, but felt absolutely right in my bones. The next morning, I bought a black Lamborghini Urus. $220,000 paid in cash. And that same afternoon, I had my lawyer finalize the purchase of my mother's mortgage debt from the bank, buying it at a discount because they were tired of dealing with missed payments and liens. And just like that, I became their landlord, their creditor, the person who literally owned the roof over their heads. Talk about a karma bus hitting you at full speed. Drew is so used to everything being handed to him on a silver platter that he didn't even bother to check who he was actually applying to work for. I'm already getting chills thinking about that reunion in the park. It's about to be a total meltdown. The reunion was set for a Saturday in May, and I drove the 12 hours from Austin to my hometown with the windows down and the engine purring like a predator, and every mile felt like putting on armor. Preparing for a battle I'd been training for through 6 years of deliberate transformation. I pulled into the parking lot at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, precisely on time, and the sound of the Lamborghini's engine cut through the ambient noise of the gathering like a chainsaw through butter, made every single head turn in unison. I'd worn a suit that cost $11,000, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than my mom's monthly mortgage payment. And I stepped out of the car moving with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. And the silence that cost $11,000, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than my mom's monthly mortgage payment. And I stepped out of the car moving with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. And the silence that fell over the reunion was absolutely delicious. My mom recovered first, came bustling over with her arms outstretched, talking about how good I looked while simultaneously assuming out loud that I must have rented the car because of course she couldn't imagine I'd actually earned this. That success could belong to me rather than being some elaborate costume I'd borrowed for the afternoon. I didn't correct her, just smiled. This tight professional smile I perfected in business meetings and made small talk with relatives who'd commented congratulations on Drew's engagement announcement 6 years ago, who'd never once reached out to ask if I was okay. The party had been going for about 40 minutes when I heard the sound that made everything worth it. This coughing, sputtering engine noise that got louder until a rust-eaten minivan lurched into the parking lot. Smoke literally pouring from under the hood, and it shuddered to a stop at the far end of the lot like it had died mid-journey. Drew climbed out first, and the contrast was so stark it almost felt staged. Him in a wrinkled polo shirt that had visible stains, khaki shorts that had seen better days, and he was sweating profusely, wiping his face with his forearm. And when he saw the Lamborghini, his entire body language changed, shoulders hunching slightly like he'd been physically struck. My former fiancée emerged next, looking a decade older than she should have, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing a discount store dress, and she was carrying their daughter, maybe 3 years old now. A little girl who started whining immediately about the heat. And I watched my former fiancé's face as she registered me standing there in my expensive suit next to my expensive car, watched something die behind her eyes. Drew tried to swagger over, tried to reclaim some of his old confidence, but it was like watching someone perform a role they'd forgotten the lines to. And he clapped me on the shoulder with forced enthusiasm, making jokes about me playing dress-up, and finally getting some ambition. His voice too loud, trying to control the narrative the way he always had. The family dinner happened under a pavilion my mom had reserved. And I sat at the head of one table because my mom had insisted, and Drew sat across from me with my former fiancé beside him looking like she wanted to disappear into the ground, and their daughter was fussy and tired, kept knocking over cups and crying. Drew launched into this speech about his current venture, some multi-level marketing thing that was obviously a pyramid scheme, talking about how he was going to teach me about real business. And my mom was nodding along like he was dispensing profound wisdom. And then she turned to me with this expectant look and told me I should apologize to Drew for leaving the way I did, for abandoning the family when they needed me. And the audacity of it actually made me laugh out loud. The words hung in the air so absurd that I couldn't contain my reaction. Not a polite chuckle, but a real laugh. And everyone at the table went quiet. And that's when I saw my former fiancé's hand move to her purse. Saw her pull out a phone that wasn't hers, Drew's phone. And her hands were shaking as she unlocked it and stood up abruptly. I can't do this anymore. I can't watch this. Her voice came out raw and broken. And she turned the phone screen toward everyone at the table, showing old text messages, conversations between Drew and his friends where he bragged about manipulating the screenshots, about how easy it had been to Photoshop me into compromising situations, about how he'd convinced her I was cheating because he'd wanted her for himself. And my mom's face went white, absolutely bloodless. And Drew lunged for the phone, but my former fiancé jerked it away. The silence was so complete, I could hear traffic from the highway half a mile away. And my former fiancé kept talking, words spilling out like she'd been holding them in for years, describing how Drew had pursued her after our breakup. How he promised her everything and delivered nothing. How they'd been living in my childhood bedroom for 4 years because he couldn't provide for his own family. How he gambled away every paycheck. How my mom enabled him constantly. And she was sobbing now, her daughter confused and crying too. And Drew just sat there with his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. I let it play out. Let the truth settle over the gathering like fallout. And then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folder I prepared, set it on the table with deliberate care, and every eye tracked the movement like I was pulling a weapon. Inside were 3 sets of documents paper-clipped separately, and I slid the first set across to Drew and explained calmly that he'd applied to my company, that I owned Lucent Tech, that he'd listed my achievements as his own, and lied about basically everything in his resume, and that I'd personally conducted his interview without him ever realizing he was talking to his little brother. His face went through several colors, red to white to gray, and my mom was shaking her head like she could deny reality through sheer force of will. But I wasn't done. Slid the second set of papers to her. The mortgage documents showing that I now owned her debt, that I bought it from the bank, that I was legally her creditor and could foreclose whenever I wanted. And I told her she'd missed 6 payments in the last year, that the bank had been 90 days from foreclosing before I intervened. The third set of papers I kept in my hand, just held them where my former fiancé could see, and I pulled out a business card, slid it across the table to her, explained it was a divorce attorney I'd vetted personally. Someone who did pro bono work for women escaping financial abuse. You weren't on my level because you deserved better than what I could offer then, but you definitely deserved better than what he's given you, I said. And her eyes met mine for the first time in 6 years, and I saw recognition there. Regret. Understanding that she'd traded something real for fool's gold. Drew finally found his voice, started sputtering about family loyalty, about how I was being vindictive and cruel. And my mom joined in, her voice shrill and defensive, calling me heartless, saying this wasn't how family treated each other. And the irony was so thick I could taste it. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and looked around at the relatives who'd gathered closer to watch the drama unfold. And I told them the whole story, explained methodically how they'd fabricated evidence to destroy my engagement, stolen my ring, how my mom had celebrated my devastation. Because she thought Drew deserved my fiancé more than I did. And I watched the crowd's expression shift from confusion to horror to disgust. My mom was crying now, reaching for me with shaking hands. But I stepped back, kept that professional distance, and I told her I wasn't foreclosing, that I wasn't actually a monster despite what they tried to make me. That the mortgage payments were reasonable, and she could afford them if Drew got a job and contributed. If she stopped enabling him and made him be an actual adult for once in his privileged, wasted life. Then I turned to Drew one last time. Looked at this person who'd been the boogeyman of my childhood and young adulthood. And he looked so small now, so pathetic, sweating in his stained polo shirt while his life fell apart in real time. And I felt nothing. Not anger or satisfaction or pity, just a vast emptiness where he used to live in my head. Family is everything, but you're not my family anymore, I said, my voice steady and final. You lost that when you decided to destroy me for sport. I walked back to the Lamborghini while Drew shouted after me. Incomprehensible words that might have been apologies or threats or pleas while my mom wailed about how I was tearing the family apart like she hadn't done exactly that 6 years ago with champagne and celebration. And I got in my car, started the engine, felt that powerful rumble through my entire body like a heartbeat. In the rearview mirror, I could see them getting smaller. My former fiancé standing apart from Drew now with their daughter on her hip. My mom collapsed on a bench with relatives hovering around her, uncertain how to comfort someone who'd just been exposed so completely, and Drew just standing in the middle of the parking lot looking lost. Looking like someone who'd finally run out of people to blame. I pulled out onto the highway heading back to Austin, back to my life, back to the empire I'd built from absolute nothing. And the last thing I saw before they disappeared completely was my former fiancé looking down at the business card I'd given her, turning it over in her hands like it was a life raft. And I hoped, genuinely hoped that she'd use it, that she'd get out before Drew dragged her down any further. Because nobody deserved to waste their life on someone who would never ever be worth it. And I should know because I'd spent too many years trying to earn love from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it freely. And that's how it ends. Proving that family is who we choose, not just who we share blood with. It really got to me that Ryan didn't stoop to their level, but instead just handed them the bill for all their mistakes. What do you guys think? Was he too nice for helping Emily with the kid after everything, or did he do the right thing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to hear what you